Hi everybody, my name is Brett Dietz. I am professor of percussion at Louisiana State University, and joining me today is Dr. Gary Olmstead, who is professor emeritus at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, where he served as the professor of percussion for 37 years. He was also the principal timpanist of the Westmoreland Symphony for 23 years, the principal timpanist of the Johnstown Symphony Orchestra for 10 years, and he's one of the founding members of the Percussive Arts Society, starting the Pennsylvania chapter in 1967, and he served as the president of the organization for 2 terms, starting in 1973. And for his wonderful performing and teaching career, he was inducted into the PAS Hall of Fame in 2013. Gary, thank you for welcoming me into your home and for doing this interview with us.
It's a pleasure to have you, Brett. I'm flattered that you would consider doing this.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. How did you get started in music as a youngster, and how did you choose percussion as your primary instrument?
I lived in a home which had a prominent musical presence. My mother was a pianist and the church organist.
Oh, okay.
And I had a sister who was 2 years older than myself, and we both were steered into piano lessons, probably from about the 4th grade for me, which was ended up being one of the probably most fruitful additions to my musical experience that carried me throughout my educational and professional career, the piano skill. Mm-hmm. And I would encourage anybody who's thinking about going into music to think about piano as a starting instrument. In any case, I started in the 4th grade with piano, took piano lessons clear into high school.
Okay.
So it was a great experience for me. Came from a very small town, probably about 3,000 population, a very small school, K through 12, one building. Yeah.
And this was in Michigan, right?
And this was in Michigan.
Okay.
Portland, Michigan was the name of the small town, about halfway between Grand Rapids and Lansing. It interestingly enough, worked out physically in this one building that somehow I got recruited to the high school band when I was in the 6th grade. And mainly because I had taken some piano lessons.
Okay.
So I'm going to go in and play the snare drum, right? So there was some orientation that I acquired through various means, and so during high school band times, I would go from one level of the school to another floor and participate in the high school band.
Okay.
Quite unusual at the time.
Yeah.
So I was able to play in the high school band for 6 years. My high school band director took quite an interest in those students that he would identify as having particular interests in music. He traveled us to Michigan State University band concerts. He traveled us to the University of Michigan band concerts. Occasionally would hear an orchestra, but not very often. And we didn't have any string program at all.
Okay.
In my high school. My high school band director encouraged me to apply for the all-state band at Interlochen.
Okay.
Interlochen is quite the place for musicians around the world, of all ages, as you may know, and right in our state of Michigan, and connected with the University of Michigan, as it turns out. And so the all-state band was full percussion-wise, but would you be interested in the orchestra?
Okay, right.
Sure, I said, why not?
Right.
So I ended up 2 weeks in the all-state orchestra.
Great.
And probably the seminal experience in deciding to not only go into music, but to specialize in percussion. So it was 2 weeks of private and group study with Jack McKenzie,
Okay.
who was at the University of Illinois at the time, one of the established early established programs in universities in percussion. And he was a mainstay at Interlochen for many years. And in addition to that, you would have to take a course while you were there. And you had choice between several different things. Well, I chose conducting.
Okay.
The second week I was there, I was selected from the conducting class to conduct the Interlochen theme.
Yeah.
It's a section of from a Hansen symphony.
Okay.
And they call it the Interlochen theme, and it's played at the end of each program. So I didn't tell my folks I was going to do that.
Okay.
So they came up to pick me up to take me home at the end of the second week. So I ended up being announced and subsequently conducted the Interlochen theme. Well, that was a pretty big deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
For a little guy from small town. I also, with regard to preparation and thinking about going into music, was able to do some private study in Lansing. So that was about a 30-mile car travel for me. My parents had to take me, but I hooked up with a percussion teacher in Lansing. His name was Frank Pernay.
Okay.
And he was a former member of the Sousa band.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
Yeah.
And he was just a great guy, and had a little drum shop and his teaching studio. And we would sit next to each other with our practice pads and our trad grip,
Yeah.
wailing away on these, probably a series of method books you wouldn't be familiar, most people aren't familiar with anymore, but the straight method. And we would play page after page after page of that material, and I think I got to be a pretty good reader as a result of that, plus the private practice at home, of course. And he said, well, what about keyboard percussion study? Mm-hmm. I said, what's that? And he said, I have a 3.5 octave Deegan marimba, okay. That old dark rosewood, the big gold, they weren't gold, what would you call them? Gold resonators, right. And the big end pieces.
Right.
But it was just 3.5 octaves, which was pretty standard at the time. So he said, rent it to you for $5 a month. Mm-hmm. And he said, if you would happen to purchase, that can go to the purchase price. So I don't know how many months I did that, but I think he sold me the instrument for about $400. So that was also quite an impressionable experience for me, right. To study with him and receive as much information and guidance from him as possible, and I think it's really served me well. Then it was the matter of getting to the University of Michigan.
Well, that was my next question. I was going to ask, could you talk about your college experience at University of Michigan, Ohio University, yes. And Cleveland, right?
Cleveland Institute. Cleveland Institute of Music. As I mentioned, my band director had taken us to Michigan State for concerts, to the University of Michigan for concerts. I ended up being very impressed with the University of Michigan, plus my experience at Interlochen. I decided to make the application. It's the only school I applied to, and auditioned personally for the director of bands at the time, Dr. William Ravelli.
Of course. Pretty
well known in the history of band music. And James Salmon, who was the percussion instructor at the University of Michigan at the time. And I was accepted. So I started there in the fall of 1959.
Okay.
I think one of the outstanding experiences I had at Michigan, if you're interested in hearing about that, sure. Is the fact that in my sophomore year, 1961, the band was selected by the State Department to tour the Soviet Union.
Wow.
And other countries in the Middle East and through Europe. We spent 8 weeks in the Soviet Union in 1961, height of the Cold War.
Yeah.
And it ended up being an entire semester. It was 15 weeks long, if you can imagine, and still holds the record as being the longest State Department sponsored tour
Wow.
of its kind. We were there when the Bay of Pigs invasion.
Oh, wow.
We were not in Russia, I'm sorry. We were in Cairo, Egypt on the same trip
Right.
when the Bay of Pigs invasion occurred,
Wow.
which was also pretty something to experience. They kept us in our hotel for several days because of anti-American riots that were occurring in Cairo, in the downtown area. So that experience, especially at the age I was, a sophomore in college, had a lasting impression, I think, on everybody that made that tour.
I'm sure.
Some for the better, some for the worse. So that was one of the main experiences.
Okay.
In fact, the symphony band was elected into the University of Michigan Hall of Fame because of that trip.
Yeah. So if we could transition from the undergrad at University of Michigan to the master's degree at Ohio University, and was it right away, or did it?
As I mentioned, because of this semester-long tour with the symphony band, a lot of us were delayed by a semester to actually graduate.
Okay.
So I ended up graduating in December of 1964, very end of the year. And because of that, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do next. And my degree was in music education.
Okay.
So I did find a teaching job just an hour north of Ann Arbor.
Okay.
So I was still in Michigan and had started a family at that time, had a small child, and taught from January to the end of the year. To be honest about it, it was a small rural school, and I taught vocal and instrumental K through 12, yeah.
Okay.
I even drove a school bus, a yellow school bus, for the time that I was there. Learned a lot from it, and one of the things I learned was that was not going to be where I was going to spend my time.
Okay.
So during the spring of that year, maybe even April, I got a call from the band director at Ohio University. And we have a graduate assistantship, would you be interested?
Okay.
And he apparently had received a recommendation for that from Dr. Ravelli
Okay. Right.
and Jim Salmon at the University of Michigan. So it seemed like an interesting opportunity for me. So traveled down to Ohio University in Athens, Ohio, southeastern Ohio, and checked it all out and decided to do that. There was a good and a bad about accepting this. And the not so good part was I had no percussion teacher.
Okay.
The great part is that I was going to be the percussion teacher.
Perfect.
So I learned a lot in those 2 years about what I wanted to do.
Right.
So started looking for positions. Again, ended up receiving a phone call from the band director at IUP,
Okay.
Daniel DeSico,
All right.
who was a doctoral candidate at the University of Michigan
Okay. there
at
you
the
go.
time.
Right.
So would you be interested in checking our position out? We're opening a percussion position, the first one. We've never had a percussion specialist on the staff. Would you come up and interview? So drove from Athens, Ohio to Indiana, Pennsylvania, and interviewed for the position. And it seemed like they were interested in putting some money to the program and purchasing much needed equipment. I was also becoming very interested in the percussion ensemble at the time.
Right.
So I recall this quite clearly. Interviewing in the chairman's office at the time. Well, do you happen to have a percussion ensemble library? Any percussion ensemble music? And he said, well, as a matter of fact, we do. I have it right here in my drawer. Pulled open this drawer at his desk, and he plopped down on the top of the desk the Chavez Toccata for percussion.
Right.
And he said, there's only one problem. I said, well, what would that be? And he said, well, part number 4 is missing. So that was the percussion ensemble library that I started with.
Every time I see a copy of the Chavez, there's always a part missing. We have 2 of them in LSU. Yeah.
I wonder if it's always the same part.
I don't know.
Maybe
I think we were missing 5. So.
Yeah, my experience with interviewing for that position, and I ended up accepting it, and I thought, well, I'll give it 3 years and see how it works out. And 37 years later, there it was.
Was that the point where, well, this is where you and I have common ground? Is that when you started studying with Stanley Leonard?
It is.
Okay.
That's how I felt I was able to make up for my lack of study during my master's degree.
Okay.
So I did get connected with Stan Leonard in Pittsburgh. He, of course, was the principal timpanist of the Pittsburgh, longtime principal timpanist of the Pittsburgh Symphony at the time. And I studied with him for a couple years and would travel back and forth from Indiana to Pittsburgh. And I think maybe the second year I was doing some study with him that he asked me to teach in his place at Carnegie Mellon at the time while he took a sabbatical.
Okay.
So it was maybe 4 students. So 1 or 2 days a week I would drive down from Indiana from my full-time job there and teach these students at Carnegie Mellon.
Right.
Yeah. Also would go to Stan's home once in a while.
Right.
But that was a fabulous experience. I learned a lot from him. And of course I'm getting pretty interested in timpani at that point, and so I'm thinking I'm going to study with the timpanist of the Pittsburgh Symphony. So I don't know, maybe I'll take in something like the Rite of Spring for my first lesson and see how that goes.
Okay, so you've been teaching at IUP for a while, and how long before you started your doctorate program at Cleveland Institute with Cloyd Duff?
I started at IUP in the fall of '66. I think I finished my degree out there in '76. Don't know if I remember for sure, but it would have been in that period of time. I also decided when I started out there that if I can't finish this in 4 years, if I didn't think that I could finish it in 4 years, I don't know.
Right.
Family at that time and a full-time job at IUP. So I decided I was going to give it a go, and was accepted to be a student of Cloyd Duff, principal timpanist, longtime principal timpanist of the Cleveland Orchestra at the time. And it was a fabulous experience. So I started summers to see if I felt that it was going to be a fit for me, because that was a conservatory, different from Ohio University, different from IUP, different from the University of Michigan.
Right.
So I knew that was going to be a challenge for me, but I decided I was going to try to work with it, and had pretty good luck that first summer. I think one of the things that's kept a lot of students from either starting or completing that program is the piano requirement.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So how diligent do you have to be on piano to do that?
Quite.
Okay.
It's a big piano school, for one thing.
Right.
That's one of the big parts of their program. So I got that out of the way, and in the process also did well enough with sight singing and ear training and things like that to pass those off during that first summer.
Good.
So I did summer, fall, spring, summer. And then the following year, I had to complete the comprehensive exam.
And you're doing all of this while your family is still in Indiana. And how many children did you have at that point? Two. Okay. So, yeah.
So the full year that I was out there, summer, fall, spring, summer, I did 3 full-time recitals, which were required for the degree, and what they called a paper with each. Okay. My first one was 60 pages, not on a word processor.
No, a typewriter.
We're calling typewriter.
And whiteout.
And retyping and redoing. So, yeah, I worked at it.
Yeah. And how many papers did you end up writing? So you
had 3, one with each.
Okay,
one with each
and
recital.
They were basically program notes, annotated program notes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Richard Weiner was the other staff member of the Cleveland Institute at the time, so I was hanging around those percussionists and all either undergrads or master's degree candidates. So that was an interesting experience in itself. Of course, studying with Cloyd Duff, he arranged the timpani in the European style.
Right.
What I would call backwards to the way we do it. And he didn't have a problem with me especially at the doctoral level, I think, of me playing American style with the arrangement of the timpani.
Right.
Of course, that was taking German-style drums and having the pedals on the backward side,
right,
or a set of Ludwig-style drums, which were easy to arrange in the regular way. But I loved the time with Cloyd. I think he was an incredible timpanist and just a wonderful gentleman. I would go to his home down the basement where he would tuck his timpani heads.
Okay.
He used all calfskin at the time.
Right.
And so get out crack a couple beers, and he would go around his timpani head tucking and talk about it, explain it, shared stories, and that was a wonderful experience in itself.
Yeah. Obviously, you have 37 years at IUP, and tell us about some of your successful graduates that you've taught over the years.
Oh my goodness, I hate to start naming names because the minute you start,
you forget somebody.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in the percussion program, I was really fortunate to be able to start a graduate assistantship. My first one was Don Baker.
Okay.
From Edgerton, Ohio. My goodness, almost all of my graduate assistants came from out of state.
Right.
Came from the University of Tennessee, from Eastman, from any number of known and lesser known schools. And that was a good experience for me and for the other students. Another unusual feature about IUP at that time is I ended up in a house. And again, one of those good and bad situations, I suppose.
Houses in where the percussion instruments were?
House.
Yeah.
Yes.
I remember I've seen it.
Yes. I think the good part is that I think students literally were living together with regard to their percussion life.
Mm-hmm.
So they kept their books there. They came in and out between classes to pick up things and drop off things. That's where they kept all their mallets and things like that. So that was in and out between rehearsals. They would be in the house. I think provided a community experience in a way
Mm-hmm.
that was really helpful, and it was really family-like,
Mm-hmm.
with all the good and bad things that can occur with families, but they were surely close.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That was, I think, a unique feature that we had to deal with.
Well, I know I can name some of my colleagues like Paul Rennick and Dr. Brian West at TCU, and then the person that's sort of taken over for you right now at IUP, Chad Heine, who's also a student of mine and a good friend of mine.
Absolutely, so. And the class that Chad came in with, I was actually going to retire several years sooner than I did. And the class that Chad came in with there were 4 or 5 totally outstanding students in that class. And I decided to try to stick it out to see them through. And we had some really good experiences, including a trip to a PASIC convention in Columbus that we performed at. And I think a lot of wonderful programs presented at IUP. Dane Richardson, Lawrence Conservatory.
Okay, yeah, Dane, okay.
Had quite a record with the service bands, the DC service bands, including the U.S. Army Band. Most recently there, Tim Husgen.
Okay.
And Jay Brown, Tom Rarick, and the field band, I believe.
All right.
Who was on camera at the Super Bowl game a couple years ago with the color guard that came in at the beginning of the game with his field drum.
Nice.
And Navy band, Bob Snyder, who came into the Navy band playing timpani. So yeah, I've had some amazing students to work with over the years. A lot of them, of course, went out into music education programs.
Right. Can you tell us a little bit about the formation of the Percussive Arts Society and how you got involved in all of that?
Well, I wasn't at the formation of it, but I was involved pretty early on as I started reading material that was becoming available from very slim sources at the time. I think the percussive notes was something like a couple, 2-3 pages of mimeographed paper that was stapled together from Jim Moore, then a percussion teacher at Ohio State University. And that started being distributed. That was taken in by the Percussive Arts Society, which was just beginning as an organization. So I became determined to try to get involved, more than just receiving that material and being interested in it myself. So I found a way to go to some of the meetings that they were starting with, pretty much in Chicago at the time, and pretty much in connection with the Midwest Band and Orchestra annual meeting, which was a pretty big deal across the country at the time, and actually I think still is. So I even remember staying in a YMCA in Chicago because I couldn't afford a hotel at the time, but I was able to go to a meeting, and that was all they were doing at the time. It was pretty much meeting only. And so during the maybe 12 years that I was on the board of directors, 1 year as first vice president, elected to the presidency for 2 full terms. I actually started during the second year of a Sandy Feldstein second term. So that was a year, so it was a total of 5 years that I served as president. But between my times as an officer and on the board of directors, the Percussive Arts Society transitioned from a meeting-only society to several days of percussion when they started doing some performing, minimal amount of performing, and a clinic or two. That was the day of percussion. That was several years. So we did 2, there might have been a third, what were called Percussive Arts Society National Conferences, PASNC. And then there was this move to days-long events. And with assistance from places like the University of Illinois. I think Tom Sywee was the host for one of those. Roosevelt University might have hosted one. So they were in Chicago at the same time as the Midwest Band and Orchestra Convention, but at least it was a day that we could call our own. And then through the inspiration of the New York State chapter, Jim Petersek, and who was at Crane at the time, Crane School of Music, and John Beck at the Eastman School, decided to do this multi-day event at Eastman. So we're going to be in Rochester, New York, right? So we figured somebody's bound to wander over here from Canada. In fact, I knew who it was going to be. So that seems like it would be international to me. So we went with Percussive Arts Society International Convention, PASIC, and we're about to celebrate the 50th anniversary of that event. And from the size of the organization at that time to chapters around the world, the organization is, I think it's probably the largest and most successful instrumental organization of its kind.
Absolutely, yeah.
So,
what would you say to a young person that is getting started in percussion and in high school or in college and trying to make a go of this as a career? What would your advice be?
Well, I hope you've done some piano study in your background, for starters. And then there's the selection of schools that I think is pretty important. And there are a huge number of choices. So I think you have to decide what it is that you want to do long term, and what school is best going to fit that for you to move you through that preparation. If it's to be a performer, let's say in a professional symphony orchestra, you need to first realize that there aren't a lot of jobs. And the jobs that there are often are occupied by one person for 30, 40 years. So for instance, if you're looking for a timpani position in a professional orchestra, there are very few jobs to be had. A few more in the way of percussion, but you have to realize that that's what you're going to deal with long haul if you think you want to do that. And you need to go to a conservatory, most likely, where the emphasis is on studying orchestral literature. So that's what you're preparing for, that's what your focus is, and that's what you do. I think the typical entry level for those positions these days are probably master's degree completed, again in a conservatory setting. And professional experience from the time you can get your eye on a first job to do anything in an orchestra. So you start doing that, and you start gaining experience and go from there. If it's a college, university teaching position you think you might be interested in, you need to be aware that for most of positions that become open, there's a DMA requirement. A doctoral requirement doesn't have to be a DMA necessarily, although most of them are. So that's a combination of performance and additional educational challenges and skills that you need to acquire.
Research. Yeah.
Yes, all of that. And that's not for everybody.
Right.
But if you are going to go into college, university teaching, that a doctoral degree does well for you, not only in terms of acquiring the position, but in moving through the educational, institutional process. But you have to get the job in the first place. So when I first started teaching at IUP, I was able to move into that with a master's degree. In fact, I had a master's degree and very little discernible experience. My half a year in the public schools, my 2-year graduate assistant degree at Ohio University, that was essentially my experience when I was accepted at IUP. But within 10 years, I had a doctorate. And as it turns out, now you need a doctorate in order to get the job. So what do you do as a high school student, let's say, if you think you want to go that route? That's takes a lot. Yeah. Takes a lot of planning, a certain amount of financial output, and determination to do what you think you want to do. And it's not easy. It's a long road. So that's kind of how I would look at that, I guess.
Well, I'd like to thank you so much for inviting me to your home and for having this conversation with me. I'd like to thank you for your service to IUP and definitely your service to the Percussive Arts Society. And you've made a huge difference to myself, to your students, and everybody in the percussive world. So thank you for everything that you've done for all of us, and I appreciate it.
I appreciate that a lot, Brett. And it's very meaningful coming from you. I know what you're doing these days in your position, what you've done to prepare to be where you are at this point in time. And so a compliment coming from you, and pleasure to have this discussion with you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.